In this video, we are going to discuss the life and works of UFO researcher Robert Hastings. Robert Hastings is a well-respected UFO researcher that was one of the first to research and write about the connection between UFOs and nuclear weapons. Robert Hastings would amass declassified government documents describing UFO interference with nuclear weapons, and he would also find credible retired military witnesses to testify their UFO experiences while working at nuclear missile silos. Because Robert Hastings would focus on credible military personnel and documents, his research is regarded as some of the best evidence that Earth is being visited by UFOs. Robert Hastings prides credible sources so much that he is often turned off by other UFO researchers who he claims do not present proper evidence. One of Robert Hastings' crowning achievements was when he gave an internationally broadcast press conference in Washington, D.C. with military witnesses he had interviewed regarding the UFO interactions with nuclear weapon sites. So who is Robert Hastings? What has he researched? And what is the connection between UFOs and nukes?
So I'm going to call them by their last names. We'll start with Robert Hastings. How did you get, what's your explanation for UFOs at nuclear weapon sites?
I can simply say after 35 years of research that these incidents have taken place. There are hundreds of declassified documents which indicate that UFOs have demonstrated a distinct and ongoing interest in our nuclear weapon sites. I've also interviewed nearly 100 gentlemen who were involved in these incidents at various Air Force bases. This is very widespread. What you're seeing here this evening is the tip of the iceberg.
This story begins in the middle of World War II. The world was in the middle of the worst conflict in human history, and there were massive civilian and military casualties on all sides. The Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan were battling for world domination against the rocky alliance of the Western powers and the Soviet Union. In an effort to bring a swift end to the war, every faction was committing their brightest minds to harness the power of the atom to develop a superweapon. There was little thought as to the effect superweapons would have in the hands of man. And in 1945, the superweapon was developed, and man's destructive capability would be changed forever.
We're allowed to say there is reason to believe that the Japanese city of Hiroshima, approximately the size of Memphis or Seattle or Rochester, New York, no longer exists. General Sputz smiled when asked if the new atomic bomb would be dropped again in the near future, but every indication is that it will be, for he announced that more B-29s are ready to follow the Pathfinder which hit Hiroshima, and that the atomic bombers would operate Air Force bases in the Marianas.
President Truman's dramatic announcement that Russia had the atom secret caused state departments all over the world to stir uneasily. At the United Nations, Soviet Representative Andrei Vyshinsky refused to comment and stalked coldly into the assembly building. The grim vision of an atomic war, which would leave complete desolation in its wake, is a problem.
The Pacific is the chosen proving ground for the United States H-bomb experiment, here amid vast ocean spaces far from human habitation. Shockwaves of the world's first H-bomb rushed towards the onlookers.
Что назвал Соединенные Штаты Америки империалистической державой. Господин представитель, это что, для вас открытие? Весь мир знает, что самая империалистическая держава – это Соединенные Штаты Америки.
That a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
The false defense buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment and the ships to Cuba is being initiated.
Good evening, this is Walter Cronkite at CBS News headquarters in New York. Well, at its beginning, this day looked as though it might be one of armed conflict between Soviet vessels and American warships on the sea lanes leading to Cuba.
The Chinese communists have announced that they conducted their first nuclear test today. By our own detection system, we have confirmed that a low-yield test actually took place in western China at about 3 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. As Secretary of State Rusk noted on September the 29th, we have known for some time that the Chinese Communists have a nuclear development program which was approaching the point of a first detonation.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He'd duck and cover, duck and cover. He'd hide his head and tail and 4 little feet. He'd duck and cover. He hid beneath his little shed.
In the years following World War II, many hostile countries developed their own nuclear weapons, putting the world in a constant state of readiness for nuclear war. This new Cold War was the world Robert Hastings was born into in 1950. His father was in the United States Air Force, and in 1967, the Hastings family was stationed in Montana at Malmstrom Air Force Base, one of the many nuclear-armed bases that were popping up around the country. At the age of 16, Robert Hastings picked up a side job as a janitor at the base radio control tower. Robert Hastings had taken an interest in the radar that he was tasked with cleaning. This radar happened to be the most advanced in the world at the time, and one of the radar officers took a liking to Robert, answering all the questions the 16-year-old had regarding radar and how it works. One day in the spring of 1967, while Robert Hastings was doing his janitorial duties, his mentor motioned to him to come look at the radar and that they were tracking 5 unknown objects flying faster than any plane that existed at the time. Robert Hastings got very excited, and then his mentor told him to leave and come back later. Later that evening, Robert Hastings brought up the incident that had occurred earlier, and his mentor did not want to talk about it. He brought it up again a few days later, and still his mentor refused to discuss the matter. Robert's father had heard rumors around the base that the UFOs were maneuvering over nuclear missile sites and launch pads. This is where Robert Hastings first realized that UFOs were real and that they were interested in our nuclear weapons. In 1973, when Robert Hastings was 23, he became aware of a magazine article that claimed what he had heard happened at Malmstrom Air Force Base was happening at other military bases around the country. That same year, he read books by UFO researcher Raymond E. Fowler and researcher Donald Kehoe that described similar accounts of UFO interference around nuclear missile sites. By spring of 1973, Robert Hastings had come to the conclusion that the phenomena is real, the phenomenon is important, and someone should start interviewing witnesses on tape about these incidents. So he began doing just that. He interviewed radar operators, people who worked on missile maintenance, missile targeting, and even launch officers. Robert Hastings would go on to eventually interview over 140 retired military personnel who were involved in incidents around the U.S. where UFOs would fly around nuclear missile sites. He also began to collect official documents through the Freedom of Information Act that discussed these incidents. He found documents that detailed that UFOs were spotted in 1945 around Los Alamos, the research center in New Mexico where nuclear weapons were developed. He also found documents that detailed UFOs being spotted at Sandia Base, where the nuclear weapons were assembled and engineered. These documents detailed fireball-like orbs moving around at high speeds around the military sites from the very inception of nuclear weapons. By 1981, Robert Hastings felt that he had enough anecdotal evidence to go on the university lecture circuit, with the goal of acquainting people with the reality of UFOs and the fact that there is a link between the phenomena and nuclear weapons. He would eventually tour over 500 colleges throughout the US and even spoke at Oxford University. In the days before the internet, Robert Hastings would personally mail copies of all the documents he had obtained for any person or group that requested them. In 2008, Robert Hastings released the book, UFOs and Nukes, that detailed some of the best evidence for the reality of the UFO nuclear connection, and he also went on Larry King Live to discuss the phenomena with some of the witnesses he had collected.
Tonight, have UFOs shut down our government's defense systems. There is evidence that something caused missiles to malfunction during test launches. Former Air Force officers tell their incredible story about the film that was confiscated by the CIA. What was on it? And why don't officials want us to see it? Find out right now on Larry King Live. Have interfered with missiles at U.S. Air Force bases, and aliens are monitoring nuclear warheads and bombs. Our first guests claim UFOs have activated missile systems at 5 Air Force bases in 5 different states. They also claim a cover-up, that the United States government is keeping the information secret. Former Air Force officers and an investigator are here with their stories. Here in Los Angeles is Robert Hastings. He's author of UFOs and Nukes. I have the book right here. The book is available at ufohastings.com. He has been investigating sightings at weapon sites for years. Bob Salas is a former captain, U.S. Air Force Base. At the U.S. Air Force. He was at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967, where there were claims a UFO caused missiles to malfunction. He's co-author of Fated Giant. Bob Jamieson is with us, former U.S. Air Force officer. He was at Malmstrom as well in 1967, and he says his superiors told him UFOs caused the malfunctions. And in Peoria, Illinois, is Dr. Bob Jacobs, former First Lieutenant U.S. Air Force, former U.S. Air Force photographic instrumentation officer. A UFO showed up on film that he shot in 1964 at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and that was later confiscated by CIA agents. Bob, what happened at Malmstrom in 1967?
1967, I was on duty as a missile launch officer. I get calls from my guards upstairs. First, I get one call saying that they're seeing strange lights flying in the sky, and I didn't pay too much attention to that. About 5 minutes later, the main security guard, the flight security controller, calls down, says he's looking at a glowing red object, very large, hovering over the front gate. He wants to know what to do. I tell him to secure the facility. We hang up. I go to tell my commanders. So within seconds of that call, my missiles start shutting down. I recall losing all 10 of them.
You didn't see the object?
I didn't see the object because I was obliged to stay underground in the capsule.
By shutting down, we mean what?
By shutting down, what I mean is they were not launchable. They were in a no-go condition, disabled.
How long to restart them?
How long to restart? Well, I'm sure it took over a day, and maybe...
All right. Now, Bob Jamieson, you were there too, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were in the Air Force?
Yes, I was in the Air Force.
And where were you when this was happening?
Okay, I was a targeting officer, missile targeting officer. I was at home relaxing, and I got a call from Job Control to tell them to come in. A missile had gone down. My job as a targeting officer was to bring him back up. And so I went into...
So you didn't see the incident, you just went to the missile?
I went to the incident. I went to the site.
Where is Malmstrom?
It's Great Falls, Montana, just outside of Great Falls, Montana.
What did you make of the story?
Well, I know that it's true. I went into Job Control after I got to the hangar. I was called in, went to the hangar, went to the Job Control, and I noticed they have a map of the whole complex with green lights where the missiles were good, but there's one small area with 10 red lights. I mean, those missiles were out.
Is it possible they just malfunctioned?
That doesn't happen. Very rarely does a missile malfunction, and I don't think any... Much more rare would be 2 at the same time, but never 10.
Now, Bob Jacobs, where were you? What were you filming, and where were you?
I was officer in charge of optical instrumentation at Vandenberg Air Force Base from 1963 to 66.
That's
our job
California?
was to photograph. That's California, so right there on the coast. Right. And our job was to photograph with high-speed instrumentation every missile launch from Vandenberg going down the test range. They wanted to find out if we could figure out a place to put a telescope where we could get a side view of the missile so that we could see all 3 stages of powered flight. So I went up to Big Sur, California, up on a U.S. Forest Service road on Anderson Peak, and I installed a telescopic sight up there. The Air Force flew in a huge catadioptric telescope from the Cape. It was built by Dr. Walter Manning at Boston University. They put the telescope up there, and with that thing, which had a focal length of 2,500 inches, we photographed an Atlas missile raising up out of the the fog cover and flying downrange. We got all 3 stages of powered flight, and as the dummy warhead and the package flew on down range, we were all celebrating the fact that we had seen the thing and accomplished the mission. When I got back to the base with the film the next day, I was called into the office of Major Florence J. Mansman, and there were 3 people in gray suits standing in there. There was a 16mm camera and a screen set up. Major Mansman said, "Lieutenant, sit down and watch this." And he turned down the lights, turned on the camera on the projector, and the film came on. And I recognized it as the film that we'd shot at Big Sur the previous day. Toward the end of the flight, I was looking at Major Mansman saying, "Pretty good stuff, huh, sir?" And suddenly he said, "Just watch this." And as I watched, the warhead, the dummy warhead, the chaff that was put out in front of it as the decoy to deflect the Russian anti-missile tracking radar, everything was flying along, and suddenly, in the same direction this stuff was flying at about 8,000 miles an hour, an object came into the frame, shot a beam of light at the warhead, flew up to the top, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew around the direction it was flying, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew down, shot another beam of light at the warhead, and flew out the same way it came in.
Well, I don't understand. Why didn't you see this when you were shooting it?
Well, it was 600 to 800 miles away from us.
Oh, I got you. And they confiscated.
Well, first of all, Major Mansman said to me, "What was that? Were you guys screwing around up there?" I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Then tell me what that was." And I said, "We got a UFO." And he said, "Lieutenant, you are never to speak of this again. As far as you're concerned, this didn't happen."
Hold on, guys. Bob Salas, you agree?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment real quick. The Air Force has perpetrated a fraud, especially in our case. They claim in their statement about UFOs that no UFO incident has ever affected national security, and we lost 20 missiles during the Cold War. They also stonewalled the Condon Committee at that time. The Condon Committee had heard about our incident and were told to go away. They said they were told that no UFOs were involved. And then the Air Force turns around and uses the Condon Committee as a reason not to further investigate UFOs.
Saw something, and coincidentally the missile shut down.
Isn't that a weird coincidence?
Yeah, I mean, many times I've flipped a light switch and
what
you
if
hear a siren. I mean,
what if the same thing happened a week earlier? Only this time 10 missiles go down. A lot of security guards see the UFOs right above the
or 5 other missile bases.
Okay, so why
repeated occasions.
Is that a coincidence too? I mean, you combine the
50s,
two,
60s, 70s, and 80s. There was over 100 people. Bill.
Well, in science, it's not evidence.
I wish Edgar Mitchell were here, but in any case,
it may not be evidence, let's say, but it is certainly
100 people are telling the same story at different Air Force bases over a 40-year period. These guys were entrusted with weapons of destruction by the U.S. government, and there's 100 now who are coming forward and saying UFOs shut down their nuclear weapons.
Right,
we have mass psychosis
in the
among
interest
our
of time,
missile forces.
In the interest of time, Dr. Jacobs, he takes pictures, he comes back, they call him in, they show him the pictures of this.
I saw it. I'm an eyewitness.
He saw it.
I'm not talking about.
And they confiscate it.
Yeah.
Why?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Hello?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mind if I speak, Mr. Comedian?
Go ahead.
I was there. I saw the film with my own eyes. I'm not lying. Why would I? I'm a university professor with a PhD and a lot of years of good, respectful research. So the guys from Malmstrom may not have seen the UFO, but they saw the results of it. I saw the damn thing on film with my own eyes, so don't call me a liar, and you weren't there. I was.
With all due respect, I'm not calling you a liar. It's just quite a step to say there was a film with remarkable images on it that the CIA confiscated.
Which I saw and which they did.
Yeah, which is quite a step from there to say it was definitely a spacecraft from another civilization. That's the leap that the skeptical community is reluctant to take.
Hey, pal, listen to me. I didn't say it was a spaceship from another civilization. I said it was something in the air that we couldn't identify. Therefore, it was an unidentified flying object. It was shaped like 2 saucers put together with a golf ball on top, and it fired a beam that we assumed was a plasma beam at a dummy warhead and knocked it out of space. Tell me what happened. Tell me who did that. Tell me in 1964 who had that technology, pal. Not us, and not the Russians, and nobody I know.
With the collection of the retired military personnel who had had interactions with UFOs at nuclear weapon sites while serving. These men detailed their experiences live, and this press conference was one of the largest UFO press conferences in history, as it was internationally broadcast. This press conference helped bring the UFO nuclear connection to the attention of many people who were previously unaware of the phenomena.
Visit, but you don't communicate with the lizards. So, there's any number of plausible scenarios to explain why we have not had open contact. I am of the opinion that whoever they are have enough sense to know that if they interject themselves into our reality in one fell swoop, there could be very dire repercussions. Whereas, on the other hand, if they engage in an on-again, off-again cat and mouse behavior that allows a slow psychological conditioning of humankind to the reality and the presence of themselves, then when open contact, if that indeed is in the cards, occurs, there will be far less trauma.
Following the press conference, Robert Hastings continued his lecture tour, educating people about UFOs. In 2016, he released a professionally produced documentary titled UFOs and Nukes. This documentary highlights some of the more notable instances of UFO interference that Robert Hastings had discovered during his years researching the phenomena. The documentary also has very nice graphics depicting the experiences the UFO officers had. Robert Hastings' research is some of the best evidence for the UFO phenomena, and illustrates just how interested the UFOs are in our nuclear weapons. It reveals some disturbing facts about the UFO capabilities. They seem to be able to fly faster and outmaneuver any human craft. They appear to be capable of accessing the means by which our species transfers highly classified information. During World War II, the development of nuclear weapons was on the US's highest security priorities, and the UFOs were flying around these top-secret sites from the beginning. The research also demonstrates that the UFOs are able to interfere with our technology and manipulate it to their will. We can hope that their interest in our nukes comes from them wanting to protect us, but we cannot assume to know why the UFOs are here or why they are interested in our nukes. Most of the documents Robert Hastings collected during his years of research are available at his website, ufohastings.com. There you can also find links to purchase his documentary and his book, both titled UFOs and Nukes. The press conference and the Larry King interview are both available on YouTube. Robert Hastings is an asset to the modern UFO community, adding a refreshing breath of nuts and bolts credibility in a field so riddled with misinformation and charlatans. His contributions to the field of ufology and the human history in general will be felt for generations to come.
That these incidents have taken place. There are hundreds of declassified documents which indicate that UFOs have demonstrated a distinct and ongoing interest in our nuclear weapons sites. I've also interviewed nearly 100 gentlemen who were involved in these incidents at various Air Force bases. This is very widespread. What you're seeing here this evening is the tip of the iceberg.